right, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here today for our webinar about digital customer engagement. I'm your host, Ned Bellavance. I'm the Director of Cloud Solutions here at XNets. So, XNets philosophy is that everyone deserves a great digital experience, and that digital experience could be your customers, your internal employees, basically anyone who interacts with your company in a digital way should have a great experience when they do that. And that's dependent on a whole bunch of different areas that need to work together smoothly to deliver that great digital experience. And so we specialize in 4 key areas to help deliver that experience. The first is around customer engagement. So that's pretty much the topic of this webinar. So I'm not going to dive too much into that. I'll let the presenter take care of that. But some other areas that we focus on is enterprise mobility. So that is creating a strategy and applications for internal use within your enterprise on mobile devices. We focus on analytics and insights that are incorporated into the applications and customer engagements that we deliver to glean additional insight and sort of end the guesswork about what your customers are looking to do and how they're interacting with your applications. And then lastly, we work in cloud and hybrid IT on the infrastructure side to ensure that these applications that you're delivering to your clients are robust and always available, because part of what can drive a bad customer experience is faulty infrastructure backing your application. So those are our 4 key areas that XNets specializes in. So now to get into the customer engagement side of things, I'd like to introduce our presenter today, Mr. Steve Trangita, VP of Digital Solutions at XNets. Steve, take it away.
Hey, thanks a lot, Ned. And once again, warm welcome to everyone who's joining us over the webinar today. The agenda for today is I'll just set the stage for you a little bit on positioning why we're here and why this topic that we're going to talk about is so timely and important today. And then we'll dive into what's going to be 6 reasons, top reasons today that we'll cover around why some companies or many companies actually struggle with building great digital customer engagement experiences. Why do many of these initiatives and projects fall short? We'll get to some prescriptive guidance to help overcome those pitfalls, and we'll do that all along the way. And then cover some next steps and answer the question of how can we get started utilizing some of these tips and tricks. So as Ned said, at XNets, we specialize in customer engagement solutions. And we think of customer engagement as stringing together the business services that you offer through digital interfaces across multiple channels. So the bread and butter channels, as you all probably know, web and mobile, but it's also things like voice enablement, live chat, chat bots, extending things to wearables like notifications and at-a-glance information, with guiding principles around how those interfaces work across all of them. They should be beautiful, easy to use. Ambient means they're always available. So when I want to engage with a business digitally, I can do it on my terms. I can do it wherever I am in the context of what I'm doing. And I'm empowered to choose the channel with which I want to engage. So, some of the things we'll talk about today are making sure that those core pillars are included in every digital customer engagement endeavor that you undertake. And I really shouldn't need to explain to anyone these days why this is important, right? We're smack dab in the middle of the digital transformation era right now. There's a lot of buzzwords out there around it: consumerization of IT, customer experience, digital self-service, mobile first. But the bottom line is this is real. As of just this year, 9 of the top 10 brands ranked as loyalty leaders are digital first brands. And speaking of multi-channel, omni-channel, the research shows that companies with the strongest omni-channel digital customer engagement strategies, they retain on average a much higher percentage of their customers as compared to companies who have been slow to adopt the digital first mindset, right? And then from a cost perspective, those benefits have been well documented as well. Around allowing and empowering customers to self-service and how that can reduce operating costs for companies. And finally, the one that's sort of on the negative side is that companies that don't do this, or companies that are behind in digital transformation and digital engagement, see negative effects. 48% of customers have left a brand's website and gone to a competitor due to a poor digital experience. And this goes well beyond just having a website, having an app, right? This stat is actually the next level of expectation, where customers are saying they want a highly customized and personalized experience, and they demand that, and they will actually go to the competitors if you haven't taken that next step in your digital interfaces. So that's what's going on in the marketplace. So again, back to why we're here. Well, knowing the things that I just presented, most businesses have already embarked on some form of digital transformation in an effort to do the things I said, stave off the competition, the digital startups, and service the new generation of customers that want to engage digitally. However, there's been a lot of studies published recently that show that the success rates for these digital initiatives are very underwhelming. They're underwhelming for the businesses in terms of business results. More importantly, they're underwhelming from the customer's perception, the customer satisfaction rates with the overall digital engagement. So, a lot of hype out there. You can do your own research, but things like this article, An Inconvenient Truth, 93% of customer experience initiatives are failing. Buzzwords have popped up. There's always buzzwords, right? Digital disillusionment, digital disappointment, the digital disconnect or divide, right? So all of these things are really pointing to the fact that it's not easy to build and deliver great digital experiences. It's not easy. It doesn't just happen by accident. So we're going to cover today some of the main reasons why that happens. But by the way, even more importantly, or more alarmingly in terms of customer engagement experiences falling short, is if businesses think that they're doing a great job. And this is an extreme survey from Medicine Research that says when they did a survey, 80% of the businesses they surveyed responded that, hey, yeah, we deliver a great customer experience and great digital experiences. But when that same research company surveyed the actual customers, there was a gigantic disconnect between the customer perceptions and how the business thought they were doing. So that's the other thing that we want to make sure that we avoid, and we identify the disconnect there and the reasons why there can be such a disconnect. And that brings us to the top 6 reasons that we're going to talk about today, why many digital customer engagement initiatives fall short of expectations. We're going to go through each one of these in some detail. To summarize on this slide, we think that there's a concept out there that we see all too often that we've labeled as settling for table stakes. Good enough is not good enough, and we'll talk a lot more about that in just a minute. Number 2, not being laser focused on what truly matters to the customer when it comes to digital engagement and getting distracted by things that aren't as important. We'll give some great examples of how that can happen. Number 3, understanding that customers today are multi-channel. And when they interact with you, oftentimes they go through a journey of interaction which span multiple touch points. And you need to make sure that you're covering that entire end-to-end journey in order for them to have a great experience. As I said, this is not easy, and it requires some new ways of thinking and new ways of executing projects. One of the new ways that's emerging as a really important discipline is called design thinking. So we're going to spend some time talking about that. Number 5, and this is a big one. We see it every day out there in the real world. Legacy systems, legacy processes, legacy organizational structures, holding back the ability for companies to deliver great customer experience. And then finally, not getting your arms around true 360 degree of the customer, lack of customer intelligence. That actually speaks directly to that one stat I showed you earlier, where customers today demand a very personalized experience. You can't personalize if you don't have a great understanding of your customer. So let's dive into each of these top reasons a little bit more. And let's start with a phenomenon that we call table stakes. Table stakes is like the bare minimum, what it takes to play in this digital transformation game, right? And what we're seeing here is the optimal word here is settle. In In the era of digital disruption, being passive or settling or doing the bare minimum is a perfect recipe for losing market share. And the road is, paved today with companies that have lost tons of market share to more nimble, more digitally focused companies. Customer expectations today are at an all-time high, and they're continuing to rise. So your competition, I guarantee you, is obsessing about digital engagement, net promoter scores as a result of that digital engagement. You should be too. Why? Well, because highly satisfied customers contribute way more revenue than even somewhat satisfied customers, right? So it makes business sense. Acquiring new customers is hard and costs a lot of money. So focusing on keeping existing customers happy through digital engagement and great service just makes good business sense. And speaking of table stakes, here's some of the symptoms of thinking in terms of table stakes that we like to say. First, I'll give you a couple of quotes, and they're not on this slide, but these are examples of actual conversations that I've recently had with some leaders out there in the marketplace who are responsible for customer satisfaction and digital engagement. Number one, we just need to check the box on having a mobile app. I love that one. Because it's the perfect example of we just want table stakes. We just want to be able to say, hey, we have a mobile app out there because everyone else has one. Well, first of all, that's not a strategy in any way, shape, or form. Secondly, it opens you up for all the pitfalls, the subsequent pitfalls that I'm going to talk about in this presentation. Third, actually, in many cases, it's probably better to have no mobile app in the app stores, and especially in the public app stores, than it is to have a poor one, right? Especially with how visible things like reviews are and the reputation aspects that are at stake. It just doesn't make any sense to do table stakes or to just be looking to check a box. Customers want to be amazed in this day and age, right? That's the name of the game, is to go above and beyond, to exceed expectations, to delight. And it's hard to do. It's not just about putting a web app out there. And that's another quote I've seen is we just want to give customers a way to do some things via our website. We're not real interested in mobile at this time. We don't really see a need for it. Another one I heard recently. Well, in our industry, we still have somewhat of a captive audience, so we don't need to be that aggressive in digital. Okay, I think history has proven that digital's coming to get you no matter what industry you're in. So, don't settle for table stakes, and we think this is super important. So engaging on the customer's terms with applications that delight, amaze, and make things simple across digital channels are actually super, super important. And speaking of consistent interfaces across digital channels, another example I'll give you. Recently, I was talking with a large national ice cream chain. And as I did some research in preparation for talking with their CIO, I noticed some things about their current digital engagement that point to the perfect pitfall that focusing on isolated applications is not a good strategy. The fact is, if you go to their website today, you can sign up for cool rewards, their clever ice cream way of saying coupons, discounts to buy stuff. And it's a really cool thing, actually. And when you go to their isolated web application, it looks like a great idea. But then I can pull up their mobile application, and it has absolutely no knowledge of that reward program. I can't pay with those rewards. Those reward points are invisible to me. And if I'm on the road and I want to engage, I have a very disconnected experience. So even though they've checked the box with a mobile app, even though they have an isolated web app, they're not connected. They're not seamless. Their suite of offerings and services are not ubiquitously connected across digital channels. And that's a major experience killer that we found. And again, the stats support the multi-channel piece, which is all about going beyond table stakes. Companies with the strongest omni-channel customer engagement strategy retain more customers. And we know today that unlike 15 years ago, customers regularly use 4 or more touch points to interact. And these are a combination of digital and in person, which, by the way, also need to be very consistent. A combination of 4 or more touch points when they interact with businesses today. So table stakes is single disconnected apps. Beyond table stakes is connected multi-channel applications. That's reason number one. Reason number two that I want to talk about is a lack of focus when you're building these digital interfaces on what matters the most when your customers go to engage. What do your customers care about the most? What's going to drive loyalty? What's going to keep them coming back and engaging with you and buying from you? Well, ironically, this seems very obvious, but it's not if you look at what businesses are focused on today, mostly when they build digital engagement channels. And that's time is what matters. Time is the new money. Your customers want to save time. They want to do things in less time with less aggravation and friction so that they can move on to the next thing that they're trying to do in their day. A recent survey from IBM, Institute for Business Value, looked at how consumers rank the things that are important to them when they're talking about interfacing digitally and digital customer experience. Number one, they're interested in having things take less time when they want to engage with a business. And by the way, I think number two and numbers 3 and 4, which are really tied for number 3 there, faster results, easier processes. These are all saying the same thing. Just make it easy for me. I just want to save time. Well, what's interesting is when IBM surveyed the leaders in IT and the executives around what they were trying to do in building out digital interfaces. Number one was we want to give our customers a feeling of control. We want to adhere to their new digital savviness, right? And way down on the list, number 5, take less time. Number 7, faster results, right? So a huge disconnect there. And it's really important for us to flip that on its head because it's about what the customer wants. And more in today's world, the customer wants to save time. They want faster response times, single taps, and things of that nature. So how do we do that? How do we avoid that pitfall when we're looking to plan digital engagement initiatives? There are many ways. Here's a couple of them. Voice enablement is getting really, really popular. And voice enablement can be done across web, across mobile, across smart speakers. There's a whole suite of interfaces that can be voice enabled. And in the right context, in the right use case, that can save the customer a lot of time. I'm driving down the road and the Starbucks app detects that I'm 2 miles from a Starbucks that I've stopped at 4 out of 5 times in the last 5 days. It can pop up an alert, or I can just say, hey Siri, order my usual coffee, and it knows where I am. It knows I'm close to that Starbucks, and it places an order for me. What a huge time saver, right? And what's interesting to me about that, by the way, and I'm not trying to bash anybody, I'm just trying to say we all need to continually be great and raise our level of game on digital experiences. But what's interesting is Starbucks doesn't do a great job of this today, in my opinion, and they have been touted as a digital leader. But simple, proactive ways to eliminate clicks and eliminate time to engaging is something that every company can continue to do better. Number 2 feeds right into that, right? Which I just mentioned, learning your habits, learning customer habits and helping them do repeatable tasks in the shortest amount of time. Doing that in the context of what they typically might want to do based on where they are, time of day, what time of year it is, all the typical contextual based clues or signals, and proactively offering contextual based shortcuts. Number 4, and this is one not to understate, show them how they can save time. It doesn't nobody any good if your digital application has these great shortcuts baked in and nobody knows how to use them, right? So another thing to consider is don't just build the features, but build in proactive tips. Did you know? Those types of things to show them how to continually save time and use the digital engagement shortcuts that you're giving them. Make sure they know about them. I happen to have a Google Home device along with some of the other manufacturers, but I get regular emails from Google that says, hey, here's some tips for how to do some things that you may not have known about. That's one of many techniques to address number 4 there, show them how. Another way, hey, pop up a little non-intrusive notification or bubble that I see, and then at my convenience, I'll click on it, and it may say, hey, we noticed that you often are doing this. Here's a faster way. That's a great way to build customer loyalty. The customer will literally say, oh, that's cool. I didn't know that. And you're on your way. So laser focus on saving customers time, apply these techniques and others as well to make sure that you're doing that in the digital interfaces that you're providing to your customers. Reason number 3. I've talked about this a little bit, but I want to dive in just a little deeper, and that's not covering the end-to-end journey. First of all, here's why this is so important. In terms of overall customer satisfaction, and that's what we're after, right? When somebody asks you, hey, what do you think of company XYZ? You're going to give a spot answer. You're not going to say, well, in these 3 instances, they did great. And it's going to be a net score, right? And so what research has shown is that as a customer moves across their journey, they often interact with many touch points in your company. An agent, physical virtual agent, a call center, your web application, your mobile application, online support. And what's interesting is that any one point in that journey that is slightly below average can disproportionately affect the net satisfaction score across the whole journey. So for example, if I were to score a company at 90% on my agent interaction, 85% for call center, 85% for web, and very mediocre, not great, 65% for support, that can actually dramatically or disproportionately reduce the final satisfaction rating that I give. So that's the business reason why we need to think about the customer's end-to-end journey. We need to make sure there's no gaps in terms of digital engagement across the customer journey and make sure that we're eliminating any potential frustration as they interact with us across digital channels, because frustration at any one step can dramatically lower the overall experience rating. What are some ways that we do that? Well, if you're building digital engagement solutions and you're not doing journey mapping, that's a big red flag right there. So experience mapping and journey mapping is a key piece of the puzzle here. Let me explain what I mean by these 2 terms, because they're not ubiquitous in terms of how the market thinks of them. So I think of experience mapping as laying out the map and saying, here's all the places I could go. Here's all the ways I could interact with your business. Here's the map of your services and your potential touch points. Make sure you lay that out and understand all the ways that a customer could interact with your business. And then a journey map is a specific route on that map. So it's the specific route that somebody takes on the experience map to get something done. And there'll be multiple use cases that need to be journey mapped out along the experience map. And doing this exercise will really highlight some of the gaps that can lead to the business results I just talked about, where there's a gap in your experience in your journey map, in the customer's ability to get things done digitally, or in the frustration level a customer may have as part of getting things done digitally. A lot of great tools out there to do experience mapping and journey mapping. Smaply, Touchpoint, Real-Time Board, UX Expressia. There's a bunch of them out there. Hopefully you're using these today. If not, we highly encourage you to check them out and incorporate them into your digital engagement initiative process. All right, so next one, failing to embrace digital design thinking. Design thinking is really an extension or a broader statement of some of the pieces that I just talked about. It's really essential to embrace design thinking and execute your initiatives with design thinking in order to get great outcomes. And design thinking is all about putting yourself in the customer's shoes. Act as your customer. So this is somewhat about outside-in thinking instead of inside-out. Instead of saying, here's the services I offer, let's present some of them digitally. That's inside-out. Outside-in is, I'm now the customer. Let me take a look at what you're doing, conduct research, and develop an understanding of what you want to do, and empathize with anywhere I see issues or friction points, or any way that we can actually improve the experience, even if you're not asking for it, because my competition may do that. And then once I've gone through that empathize and study process, honing in on those key problems and having ideation settings around how to solve those problems through digital interfaces and digital technology. There's a whole methodology that we use around ideation settings that I'll give a little bit of overview of at the very end. That's critical to hone in on the most important things and then really talk about some innovative ways that you can solve those problems for your customers. Now, interestingly enough, you're not always going to get it right when you finish the first ideation setting and say, this is what we're going to try. And that's why the next phase, prototyping and testing, is so important in design thinking process. You need to put prototypes in front of your constituents early and often. Whether it's, and I'm talking about whether it's B2C or B2B or business to partner, it doesn't matter. You need to be prototyping your solutions to the issues that you've observed and empathized with, and getting instant feedback on that, and then continuing to do that even after you've built the software. A lot of people think that when they make a software release or an application release, they're done, right? They celebrate their success. What I like to say is that's step one. Step two is now continuing to monitor and measure how people are using that live service and continuing to use and evolve in their use of that service so that you can continuously improve those things. Those are all principles of design thinking. Some of the early phases of that process, empathize, define, ideate, there's some great resources out there for any of you looking to learn some of these techniques. I'll give you a couple of them. There is a book out there called The Sprint Book by Jake Knapp, who was originally with Google Ventures. And through dozens and dozens of prototype exercises and innovation exercises at Google Ventures, they developed this really lean technique where you can, the book is actually subtitled How to Solve Big Problems and Test New Ideas in Just 5 Days. And it's a very iterative, collaborative, tool-based approach that's used there. So that's a good one. You can also just look into what's called lean UX. There's a lot of good thinking around how to execute lean UX design and techniques, documentation out there. So all of this probably sounds great to you, and even when you do all of these things, you still have a large pitfall looming, which is you probably have a ton of legacy systems, a ton of isolated data sources, and they can severely hold back what you're able to accomplish digitally. So we have to overcome what I call the anchor of legacy systems if we're going to truly provide a great experience. And I did mention legacy systems right off the bat because that's the first thing IT people think of when they think of legacy, is legacy IT. But it's equally important to look at legacy processes, business processes, and even legacy org structures and your overall your overall business and organizational culture. Digital transformation often requires cultural changes. We see that over and over again because, to really succeed in digital transformation, first of all, it has to start from the top. We have to break down silos. We have to break down any sort of selfish kind of thinking that may go on in an organization where someone's being territorial, for example. Right? All of those things can end up surfacing themselves as bottlenecks in the customer experience. And that's part of the tips that we're showing here for overcoming what we call the anchor of legacy. Right? It has to come from the top. Often requires cultural changes. We have to break down silos and disincentivize any what I call inhibiting behaviors that are going on in our organization. Really, your customer experience strategy should be an integrated, coherent strategy across lines of business, across business units, across the entire organization. And if you're working in isolation, if only one department is working on a specific aspect of customer experience, you're probably going to run into some roadblocks. Here's a great example. We were recently hired to work with a large investment firm who specializes in helping high net worth individuals get a better return for their investments. They decided they were going to build a great digital interface to help people open new accounts. Self-serve, right? Perfect. It's right along the lines of what we're talking about with digital transformation. And so they already started the pre-design. They came up with this great idea to allow a full end-to-end digital account opening. And on the surface, it was great. They would be able to, completely self-serve for their customers, open accounts with all the information that needs to be gathered and the workflow that needs to take place digitally. But what happens at the end of that workflow is the new account opening and all the data ends up going to the back office, which is highly manual, bogged down by legacy systems, a multi-day process. And so at the end of the day, the final customer experience is, oh, I use this awesome, beautiful interface. I put in all my information. I talk about my risk profile. I choose some investment options and I open an account. But then it goes into no man's land. I don't have good visibility into where it is for the next few days. I'm dealing with back-end legacy processes and legacy systems. So all of that needs to be thought of in a holistic way if you're really going to succeed with a digital interface. And to accelerate some of the modernization that we're talking about in your legacy, there's a lot of new tech out there today that we should be thinking about and using. And the most simple and great example is the cloud. Cloud technology can greatly accelerate your digital transformation and your modernization efforts. There's a lot of pre-baked things out there that you can use that can speed up these transformation initiatives. So the last one, which is also my favorite one, because I think it's the one that can be the hardest to do, is when digital engagements fall short because the interfaces just aren't smart enough, right? A lack of customer intelligence. This is a simple illustration of there's so much data out there and it's only growing and growing in size over time. And most companies' ability to actually capture that data and leverage it and continuously incorporate it into their digital engagement intelligence is really lacking. It's really a focus area that needs to improve. And it's something we see a lot out there. Data is siloed out there. The customer information that we have is split across different silos where there are different owners in the organization for those silos. The customer journey consists of multiple processes, each of which is siloed, and it's hard to collect analytics on the end-to-end process and report status on the end-to-end process. This is really, really important to accomplish the types of digital interfaces that I've talked about. And what I'm showing you now is a picture of how, in a perfect world, this could look, and it's a high-level reference architecture. But let me just walk you through it so I can give you sort of the utopian vision here for what we call intelligent applications. The intelligent applications sit at the top of this stack, and they're the actual interface points. Messaging, instant messaging, SMS, email, web, mobile, social, your chat, your live chat, your chat bots, your point of sale, your systems that your call center folks are using. Those are your interface points. And first of all, in terms of collecting intelligence, there's a lot of data to be captured right in those interfaces themselves, right? So one of the things that you need to think about is channeling the data you're collecting from the usage of those interfaces, and that's the line you see on the right-hand side, and feeding that back into your intelligence engine and your data warehousing, which starts at the bottom up. So at the bottom up are the types of data that we collect and that we want to use to make our digital interfaces smarter. One category of that data actually should come from the digital interfaces themselves. There's another category of data, and you see this in the blue shading, which we call external signals, which give you the contextual smarts that your digital applications need to have. What time of day is it? What time of year is it? What season is it? What's the weather like? Where am I today? Am I on the move? Am I stationary? What kind of topics are trending and what are customers asking for today? These are all external signals that we can use to personalize digital experiences. And they should feed into the 360-degree database of customer data that we have and maintain within our company. So really, that's the way that we like to think about that, is your digital interface should be continuously listening to signals. so that you can customize those interfaces to the context that your customer wants and needs and reduce the amount of time it takes for them to interact with you. That does involve having some advanced analytics layer involved, and that's the second tier you see, where you may have predictive analytics and some artificial intelligence or machine learning models that churn through the signals and the customer data warehouse, right? So that they can filter those aggregate signals up to some type of actions engine that can make recommendations, present timely hints and tips, initiate transactions in a timely way, and even solicit feedback to clarify where there may be some confusion about what the customer is trying to do. So this type of architecture is something we should be thinking about in terms of building intelligent applications, making them smarter, easier to use, and more engaging. And that leads to the end goal, which is building smarter, easier to use, pleasing applications across digital channels, self-service, and beyond self-service, which is almost table stakes, proactive recommendations and helpful calls to actions, reducing time, anywhere across the channels at the top. To do this, by the way, you also need to have sort of a more unified tech platform, which you're seeing here at the bottom with a label of digital experience platform. That's another thing we help our customers with an awful lot, which is how do we build a more integrated platform that drives the intelligence, that drives the experience, that drives the content, so that we can ubiquitously provide features and services across the top channels that you're seeing here today. So that's where we want to get to. And hopefully this webinar has given you some tips for why a lot of companies don't get there or aren't there yet and are struggling. So that really takes us through the today's 6 major topics that we wanted to surface around why many digital initiatives that are in progress or completed have failed to meet the level of expectations that businesses and their customers have hoped for. So if that was helpful to you, a common next question may be, that's great. How do I get started with implementing some of these suggestions and approaches? We do offer something called a digital solution kickstart, which is an approach that we've tested over time and refined, and we think it's a really good way to jumpstart or kickstart your next digital customer engagement initiative. It's really a 3-step process that leads to rapid implementation. Step 1 is making sure that we follow the first pieces of the design thinking process. We understand and empathize with your customer needs. We understand what you have today and where the gaps are today. So we look at the key business drivers and market opportunity, what your competition is doing. Those are all inputs to the envisioning of a solution. Once we have level set on those, you'll always be able to go back to those prioritized objectives and requirements to say, here's why we set off in the roadmap that we did. And the highest priority things will go right in solution envisioning, which will be some of the experience mapping and journey mapping. What's the end state experience we want them to have? We think visualization is so important. So it's not starting by writing a requirements document. It's doing some of that lean UX, rapid innovation design, to bring some of these ideas to life in prototype form and putting them in front of people. We'll do this as part of this process. We call it innovation through visualization. You see it there in step 2, where we'll use tools like Envision. We'll put together rapid prototypes of what we're thinking in terms of your digital engagement interfaces, and we can get some feedback on them right away. In the meantime, we'll be thinking about the technical feasibility and technical approach that needs to be had in order to build them effectively, so that we can come out with a roadmap and an action plan that's intelligently phased and ties back to your prioritized objectives. It's highly specific about phase 1 in terms of how long it's going to take, what it takes to build it, who's going to build it, what the ongoing support plan will be, everything you need to execute to go into step 4 for phase 1. And then it's also a roadmap that talks about, here's what we think today, phase 2, phase 3, and phase 4 look at. But we're going to continue to refine that, obviously, over time as we continuously monitor the results of phase one. So we package that up into a very rapid offering. It's typically 2 to 3 weeks. Sometimes it's 4 weeks, but we like to do it faster than that, so that we get quickly to action on this. That's called our digital solution Kickstart, and it's a great way to get started. So reach out to us if you are interested in hearing more about that.
Thank you, Steve. That was an excellent presentation. I do have a couple questions that surfaced up from the audience, so if I could just ask you those. Excuse me. The first question is, how do I get accurate metrics on customer satisfaction and engagement? So I think you'd referenced that companies think they know how well they're doing, and then they actually find out how well they're doing. But how can companies actually get those metrics to figure out how well they're doing today?
Yeah, so there's a lot of metrics that go into the answer to that question. One is you need to embed continuous monitoring into every interface that you have, right? And that the continuous monitoring will give you things like daily active users, monthly active users, repeat visits, journeys that end in abandonment versus transaction. These are all real metrics and statistics that you can capture through things like Google Analytics. Mix Panel's another good one to look at. These are all tools that you can embed into your digital interface platforms so that you're continuously monitoring the success of these things. You can actually come up with things like net promoter scores through a number of techniques like social media monitoring and some other monitoring that we help our customers with. And that's another piece of it, is using the tools to actually come up with pretty standard and industry accepted calculations like net promoter score, CSAT scores, again, all driven by analytics that take place from monitoring data points, both internal to your applications and the uses, and external to things like social media and survey responses. And that's another one, by the way, that I probably should highlight, which is every digital interface should have, hey, give us your feedback.
Right.
And you should be collecting that and feeding that into those metrics that I talked about.
Absolutely. The next question is in reference to getting buy-in from senior level. Are there any tips or tricks for getting C-level buy-in?
Yeah, I mean, I think coming prepared with real statistics always helps. So there's a lot of statistics out there about some of these pitfalls that I've mentioned today that you can bring to senior leadership and say, hey, look, 60% of companies that have tried this approach have not succeeded for these reasons. And one of those reasons is that we need to be more unified as an organization. You can look up a lot of statistics from Gartner and Forrester and the likes that say when a customer is not aligned from the top down with digital transformation, the success rates are very poor. And those are factual studies that have been done by a lot of the agencies that are out there. So come prepared with those statistics. Make sure you articulate the true business benefits from both sides of the equation, from the cost saving side and from the revenue generation side. Be prepared to talk about things like customer lifetime value, which uses both sides of that equation to justify digital engagement initiatives, the revenue generating side and the retainment customer satisfaction side. Those are all talking points that you can potentially bring.
Great. I think we only have time for one more question, but you'd mentioned, legacy and back office systems and how that's a major roadblock. At what point should people engage their IT department to, try to streamline that a little bit?
Yeah, I would be doing that interactively and integrated into these overall initiatives. Don't wait, because if you wait too long, they're going to end up being those roadblocks to your overall experience. I use the example of the financial firm where you can design the best digital interface, but if you're stuck with the roadblock, the weakest point, if you will, which is legacy, you're going to be in trouble. So continuously looking for modernization and always having a roadmap to continuously modernize. And by the way, that may not mean rewriting every one of your legacy systems, because that's just not practical in most cases. But having a roadmap is practical, and that roadmap may include incremental steps that you're always taking. For example, putting a services layer or a services bus in front of some of your legacy systems and caching the data that's most used by the digital interfaces that you want to build. That type of thinking should be on your roadmap as a way to make sure that legacy systems don't come up and bite you in these digital engagement solutions.
Great, thank you. That is all the time we have today. I want to say thank you to Steve for presenting during this webinar. It was very informative. I want to thank everyone who attended for taking the time out of your busy day. If you have any questions or need more information, you can go on our website at xnet.com or reach out to us through LinkedIn or Twitter. And thanks again, everybody. Enjoy the remainder of your day.